When we think about all the medicines and medical devices out there, like the ones we all rely on, well, keeping them safe, that's a big deal, right?
Huge. It really is.
And for folks who want to know how that safety net actually works, today we're taking a deep dive into adverse event reporting.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. We're going to sort of like peel back the layers and see how potential issues with these medical products are first spotted, how that information gets to the right people, and then how it's all analyzed to keep us all safe. It's a whole system.
It is. And our sources for this deep dive give us this amazing look at the whole picture from the very beginning when a drug is being developed all the way to what happens when it's out there being used by lots of people. We'll look at the regulations, the steps involved in reporting these events, and all the work that's being done to constantly improve the system. So, where do we even start? Like, how is a potential adverse event even first noticed?
Well, it's really monitored all the time throughout the whole life cycle of a drug or a medical device. Before a treatment is ever given to a person, there's already a bunch of checks in place. Like our sources point out, preclinical toxicology studies. They're crucial for spotting any early warning signs. In animals, of course.
So, this isn't just like a quick glance, right? These are pretty in-depth
Oh
studies.
yeah, incredibly thorough. Scientists look at a whole bunch of things. I mean, some are obvious, like do the animals, die more often? But they also look for subtle signs of illness. And they're very careful about tracking changes in things like body weight, how much food they eat, and then they go deep, like blood work, hematology, looking at their urine, even examining the animal's organs, that's the gross pathology, and then even zooming in further by studying tissue samples under a microscope, histopathology. It's all to get a really complete picture of potential problems way before any human trials begin.
Right, because you don't want to find that out later on.
Exactly. And catching those early signs, even in animals, because of course it's not a perfect prediction of how humans will react, but it really helps to reduce the chance of big problems later down the line.
It's like testing the waters, like you said.
Yeah.
So then we move on to clinical trials, where they're actually using the treatment in people. How do they keep track of adverse events in those trials?
Well, in clinical trials, especially in what are called phase 3 trials, which are also looking at drugs that are meant to be used for a long time, the people in those trials, they're given the drug for longer periods, and that's deliberate. It's to collect more data on safety. Because the longer someone's taking a drug, the more chance there is of spotting those less common or delayed side effects that might not show up in shorter studies.
So they're not just seeing if the drug works, they're watching very closely to see if it causes any harm?
Absolutely. Safety is a top priority throughout the entire drug development process.
Mhm.
And it's important to remember that this monitoring, it doesn't just stop when a drug gets approved and is available to everyone. Actually, post-market surveillance, that's what it's called. It's a really crucial phase for identifying adverse events because now you've got a much bigger and more diverse group of people taking the drug than you could ever have in a clinical trial.
Right, right. Out in the real world. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know adverse events are always being watched for, but what happens when somebody, like a doctor or a patient, actually thinks they see one? How do they report it? Like, what's the actual process?
That's where all these reporting processes come in. Regulatory bodies, the ones in charge of making sure things are done properly, they've set up systems for this very reason. In the U.S., the big one is the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and they have a system called FAERS, the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System. It's basically a central database where all these reports from healthcare professionals, patients, even the drug manufacturers, they all go there.
FAERS. Okay, I'll try to remember that one.
It is kind of a mouthful.
But who does the reporting? Like, who's actually sending these reports in?
Well, it's a joint effort, really. So you've got healthcare professionals like doctors, nurses, pharmacists. They're all supposed to report any suspected adverse events they see in their patients. But what's interesting is patients can report things directly too, to the agencies or to the company that makes the drug.
So if I think I'm having a bad reaction to something.
You can report it.
Interesting.
And then, of course, the manufacturers themselves, they're required by law to have their own systems to receive, investigate, and then report any adverse events they hear about if they're related to their products.
So they're listening, they're monitoring.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And our sources make it clear that they aren't just sitting around waiting for reports. They have to be proactive, like if they spot something unusual in their own quality control checks or during manufacturing, anything that raises concerns about the safety of their products, they have to investigate it.
It makes sense. It's a big responsibility. Which, speaking of, let's talk about the regulations. Like, what are some of the key requirements and responsibilities that the drug companies have when it comes to all this?
Well, they've got to comply with a whole bunch of regulations. And our sources point out that this covers everything from the moment they get those raw materials to make the drug all the way to when the finished product is shipped out.
Yeah.
Every step. And one really big part of this is keeping very detailed records.
An audit trail, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Like for every single batch of an intermediate product or the final active pharmaceutical ingredient API is what they call it, it has to be reviewed and approved by quality control before they can move on to the next step, whether it's making more of it or sending it out. And there's this other requirement where they have to review everything once a year.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, all the batch production records, the stability data that shows how well the product holds up over time and any complaints they've gotten. This big annual check is to make sure that all their controls during the process, the ways they make it, the specs of the final product, that's all still good, or if they need to change things.
It's like a constant process of checking and rechecking.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so what happens if they find out something new about a drug's safety, like after it's been approved and people are already taking it? How do they handle that new information?
That's where they have these things called risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, or REMS. Our sources don't go into a ton of detail, but it's really important to understand. The FDA can require a company to have a REMS to make sure that a medicine's benefits still outweigh the risks, especially if new safety issues come up after it's already being used. There's all sorts of things they can do, like maybe doctors have to follow special rules when prescribing it, or maybe patients have to go through a certain educational program to learn about the risks, or maybe patients taking the drug have to be monitored really closely.
So it's not just about, like, pulling the drug off the market.
No, it's more about managing the risk proactively. It's a balancing act, right? Making sure people can still access treatments they need, but doing it safely.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about identifying and reporting adverse events and the whole regulatory side of things. But what happens to all that data that gets sent in? How do they go through it to figure out if there are any safety problems?
Well, that's where adverse event analysis and signal detection come in. They get so many reports, so they have to go through it all and try to spot potential safety signals. A safety signal is like an early warning. It might mean there's a new risk associated with a medicine or a device.
So they're looking for a needle in a haystack, basically.
It really is a lot of data.
Yeah.
And there's a few reasons why signal detection is so tricky. For one, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between a side effect from a drug and just, someone getting sick from something else, because people get sick all the time, so you have to see if something's happening more often in people taking a certain drug than you'd expect normally. And then you have the issue of, people often take lots of different medications at the same time. That's polypharmacy, and it makes it hard to know which drug might be causing a problem.
So it's not always simple to connect the dots.
No, not at all. That's why they use all these statistical methods to analyze all that data, to look for unusual patterns. And then the regulatory agencies, like the FDA, they use this information to figure out what to do next. Maybe they'll ask the company to update the drug label with new warnings. Or, in really serious cases, they might even think about pulling the drug from the market if they think it's too risky.
So the analysis guides the action.
Yeah. Think of it like this. If you're looking at a bunch of data about daily temperatures and you see a sudden spike, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a heat wave coming, but it's something you'd want to look into.
I like that analogy.
It's all about patterns.
Now, our sources don't give us specific examples of, like, really big adverse events and what happened afterwards. But can we talk generally about, like, what kind of impact it has when serious safety issues are found?
Sure, when there's a serious adverse event that everyone agrees is definitely a problem, it can have a big ripple effect. Often, healthcare professionals get new guidelines for prescribing the drug, so they might start using it more cautiously or only in certain situations. Sometimes the regulatory agencies make the company add what they call a black box warning to the drug's label. That's like the most serious type of warning.
Okay.
It highlights risks that could be life-threatening. And obviously, stuff like this leads to more scrutiny, not just of that particular drug, but sometimes of other similar drugs, too.
So it can shake things up.
Yeah, it does.
And beyond just the immediate response, from doctors and regulators, what about public perception? Does it affect how people view the drug companies and the agencies that are supposed to be keeping things safe?
Events like these, where a drug turns out to be more risky than people thought, can definitely erode public trust, both in the pharmaceutical industry, making the drugs, and the agencies in charge of safety. It's really important for everyone to be open about the risks and to communicate clearly about what's happening. That's how you maintain trust and make sure both healthcare providers and patients are informed.
Transparency is key.
Absolutely.
Okay, now one of the biggest challenges in all of this is underreporting. Like,
Mhm.
we know adverse events don't always get reported. Why is that, and what are the implications?
Underreporting is a big issue. A lot of reasons why it happens. Sometimes patients or even healthcare professionals don't realize that a symptom could be related to a medicine, or they might not think it's a big deal and not bother reporting it. And sometimes the process itself can feel like a hassle, too complicated or time-consuming. And then, like we were talking about earlier, it's not always clear if something was actually caused by the drug or by something else entirely. So it's a mix of things. Awareness, how easy the reporting process is, and just the basic difficulty of figuring out cause and effect.
Makes sense. But what does this underreporting mean in the big picture?
Well, it means we might not be getting the full story about a drug's safety. If only a small percentage of adverse events are actually reported, it can take a lot longer to spot important safety signals. And that could mean more people are at risk before the problem is fully understood and addressed. It's a real concern.
It is. So, given all these challenges, what's being done to improve things? What's on the horizon for adverse event reporting and pharmacovigilance?
Well, there's a lot happening, actually. Lots of innovation. New data mining techniques are letting them analyze those huge amounts of data in more sophisticated ways. And electronic health records, those are becoming more and more common. And they have the potential to make it much easier to capture and share safety information. And they're working on ways to make reporting easier for everyone, like user-friendly online portals, integrating it into the systems that doctors and hospitals are already using. And global collaboration is becoming more and more important because sharing safety information between countries gives you a more complete picture of a drug's safety around the world.
So, technology and better communication are playing a big role.
Absolutely. Huge. Being able to collect, share, and analyze all that data efficiently, that's what's going to make a big difference.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. We've covered a lot: how adverse events are first spotted, the systems for reporting them, the regulations, how they analyze all that data to look for safety signals. We even touched on the impact of all this, the challenges with underreporting, and what the future holds for this whole field. It's so important for protecting public health.
It really is. When you understand how all these systems work, you really get a sense of just how much effort goes into making sure medicines and medical devices are used safely.
It's pretty impressive. And after learning all about the complexities of adverse event reporting and all the work that goes into keeping us safe, it really makes you wonder, what else can we do to make things even better? What other innovations are out there that could really change the game when it comes to monitoring the safety of medicines and keeping people healthy? Something to think about. Anyway, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.